Welcome to part 2 of our video on JavaScript examples to use in ASP.NET Core MVC projects. In this video, we will explore 25 more JavaScript examples that can be used to enhance your web applications. JavaScript is a popular programming language that is used to add interactivity to web pages. It is a client-side language that is executed by the browser, making it a great choice for building dynamic web applications. Let us dive into our examples. Example 26. JavaScript classes. Classes are a fundamental concept in object-oriented programming. We can define a JavaScript class using the class keyword. For example, let us create a person class with a constructor that takes name and age as parameters. Example 27. JavaScript inheritance. Inheritance allows us to create a new class based on an existing class. We can use the extends keyword to inherit from a parent class. For example, let us create an employee class that extends the person class. Example 28. JavaScript modules. Modules allow us to organize our code into reusable blocks. We can use the export keyword to export functions, variables, or classes from a module. For example, let us create a math module that exports an add function. Example 29. JavaScript promises. Promises allow us to handle asynchronous operations in a more manageable way. We can create a promise using the promise constructor and resolve or reject it based on the outcome of the operation. For example, let us create a promise that resolves with a success message. Example 30. JavaScript async await. Async await allows us to write asynchronous code that's easier to read and maintain. We can use the async keyword to define an asynchronous function and the await keyword to pause the execution of the function until a promise is resolved. For example, let us create an asynchronous function that adds two numbers. Example 31. JavaScript generators. Generators allow us to create iterators that can be used to generate a sequence of values. We can use the function star syntax to define a generator function. For example, let us create a generator that yields a sequence of numbers. Example 32. JavaScript iterators. Iterators allow us to iterate over a sequence of values. We can use the symbol dot iterator property to define an iterator for an object. For example, let us create an iterator for an array. Example 33. JavaScript map. Map is a data structure that allows us to store key value pairs. We can use the map constructor to create a new map. For example, let us create a map that stores the names and ages of people. Example 34. JavaScript set. Set is a data structure that allows us to store unique values. We can use the set constructor to create a new set. For example, let us create a set that stores the names of people. Example 35. JavaScript weak map. Weak map is a data structure that is similar to map, but it allows us to store weak references to objects. We can use the weak map constructor to create a new weak map. For example, let us create a weak map that stores the names and ages of people. Example 36. JavaScript weak set. Weak set is a data structure that is similar to set, but it allows us to store weak references to objects. We can use the weak set constructor to create a new weak set. For example, let us create a weak set that stores the names of people. Example 37. JavaScript proxy. Proxy allows us to create an object that acts as an intermediary between the caller and the target object. We can use the proxy constructor to create a new proxy. For example, let us create a proxy that logs messages to the console. Example 38. JavaScript reflect. Reflect is a built-in object that provides methods for intercepting and manipulating JavaScript operations. We can use the reflect object to create a proxy that logs messages to the console. Example 39. JavaScript Intel. Intel is a built-in object that provides methods for formatting dates, numbers, and strings according to the locale. We can use the Intel object to format a date according to the locale. Example 40. JavaScript web workers. Web workers allow us to run JavaScript code in background, separate from the main thread. We can use the worker constructor to create a new web worker. For example, let us create a web worker that logs messages to the console. Example 41. JavaScript web storage. Web storage allows us to store data locally on the client side. We can use the local storage object to store and retrieve data. For example, let us store a user's name in local storage. Example 42. JavaScript web sockets. Web sockets allow us to establish real-time communication between the client and server. We can use the WebSockets constructor to create a new WebSocket. For example, let us create a WebSocket that connects to a server. Example 43. JavaScript Canvas. Canvas allows us to create graphics and animations on the client side. We can use the Canvas element and the getContext method to create a canvas context. For example, let us create a canvas that draws a rectangle. Example 44. JavaScript SVG. SVG allows us to create scalable vector graphics on the client side. We can use the SVG element to create an SVG document. For example, let us create an SVG that draws a circle. Example 45. JavaScript drag and drop. Drag and drop allows us to create interactive interfaces that allow users to drag and drop elements. We can use the drag start, drag over, and drop events to handle drag and drop interactions. For example, let us create a drag and drop interface that allow users to drag and drop images. Example 46. JavaScript geolocation. Geolocation allows us to access the user's location. We can use the navigator.geolocation object to get the user's location. For example, let us get the user's location and display it on a map. Example 47. JavaScript notifications. Notifications allow us to display messages to the user. We can use the notification constructor to create a new notification. For example, let us create a notification that displays a message to the user. Example 48. JavaScript Push API. Push API allows us to send push notifications to the user. We can use the push manager object to subscribe to push notifications. For example, let us subscribe to push notifications and display a message to the user. Example 49. JavaScript service workers. Service workers allow us to run JavaScript code in the background, separate from the main thread. We can use the service worker constructor to create a new service worker. For example, let us create a service worker that caches resources. Example 50. JavaScript WebRTC. WebRTC allows us to establish real-time communication between the client and the server. We can use the RTC peer connection constructor to create a new peer connection. For example, let us create a peer connection that establishes a video call. That's it for today's video. We have explored 25 JavaScript examples that can be used to enhance your ASP.NET Core MVC projects. Try using these examples in your own projects and see the difference they make. Thank you.